Now, I did want to ask about the book, and maybe you guys can't speak on it because it's might be more Robin's field. But the art style in the book is very dark. Like you, within the shadowing, the shading, it's all done with like thick black ink as opposed to levels of shade. And that causes a really hard contrast with all the whites of the page. So when you're actually showing detail, um, did that guys come from you both saying, "Hey, we want this book to look this way," or did Robin just sort of start ripping off pages and that's sort of what came in the mail one day?
I think it was all
Robin,
Robin.
that's what Robin. Robin basically shot it over. He shot over the pencils first, which are very loose, and it's kind of weird. He actually did a lot of rendering in the pencils that you can't see in his inks, where he needs a lot of cross hatching and stuff. And then he inked it, and because he's like, "I can ink," I'm like, "Okay, go ahead, ink it." That's when an artist wants to do something, let him let he or she do it for sure. So when he came over, he starts delivering pages. That's how they looked like, and
Okay.
at one point we thought about coloring it, to be honest. That's why he inked it the way he inked it, and I was like, well, can we always render this in color and that'd be totally fine. And he's like, I can color too. I'm like, sure, but with the timing that you have, no. But I was just sort of joking with him when I said that. But he's like, I would color the covers. I'm like, that's only 5 pages. Yeah, go for it. So the covers are actually colored by Robin as well. So you
Cool.
so you can sort of see how his inks would translate the colors from there. But when we pitched it to SourcePoint Press, I told them that we could color it. And when we pitched it, don't solicit it immediately. Give us time to find the colors to do it, and get the funding and all that set up. And they actually told us not to. They liked it in black and white because they passed it around the crew over there, and we had a meeting about it. And they talked about the 1950s comics, how it was back then. I don't know, people like I don't collect a lot. I don't collect vintage comics. I've seen them on. I'll be honestly online, read them online because I can't afford to have those kind of things.
Yeah.
I spend all my money on toys, so stuff like that. But if you look at the history of the 1950s horror scene, that's when it exploded, anyways. Like EC Comics was started. See, don't quote me on this. My history is really bad. I think they started the horror scene. They were an educational comic book company, I think, and then they went to horror to try to save themselves, or as a joke. I can't remember what it was.
I think Robin's artwork too. I think Robin's artwork more than EC, I think looks like the 1970s Marvel horror boom of the kind of oversized like magazine format books, and I love that stuff. And it's all like Dracula and Werewolf by Night and various kind of Vampirella ripoff characters, but they published it in the magazines because they didn't have to put the comics code on the magazine, and there was all these crazy rules, like you couldn't say the word zombie, or you couldn't have blood, red blood. So by going black and white, they got to kind of skirt all these weird satanic panic rules that were hitting in the 70s. So definite influence from EC from the 50s for sure. But Robin's pages, like if you print them up on paper, and especially the pages that don't have like a cell phone or a flat screen TV in the background, I think it totally looks like that stuff. I think it totally looks like that kind of 1970s Marvel horror boom, kind of this timeless era. And so it's this lucky accident that the powers that be were cool with us being black and white, and it was one less thing to do, but it looks really great. It looks really great. And I know some publishers don't like black and white. It's almost like with film. There's this sense that anybody under the age of, I don't know, 50 doesn't like black and white movies or books, which is wrong. But like that's why film has such a hard time doing black and white. So I was waiting for Howard to say that. I was waiting for Howard to say, "Oh no, the publisher, it has to be in color." So I was very happy the way it looks. Like it has that timeless horror quality to it for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one thing that caught my eye about it almost instantly is on the main cover there. You had going along to the titling and stuff like that, but then it's got the dots with the characters' faces in it. And that totally, yeah, I saw that and I was just like, okay, yeah, so it's definitely riffing on like the old school stuff. Like you mentioned, the 70s horror boom for Marvel. and that's sort of it. That seeing that geared my brain to go, okay, I kind of know what I'm getting into. I know the perhaps a little bit campiness that I might run into on this. And then the next thing I noticed about it when I looked at page one, it was because of that black and white contrast. It was a little odd for me because my brain then geared toward thinking about like The Walking Dead, right, by Image, and I was just like, oh, okay, this is going to be a little different as well. And so when I went through it, it had this really definitely a dark, creepier tone about it. Like with the Walking Dead comic, I felt it was pretty upfront about everything, whereas with your book, it just with the way it was set up the first 2 pages there, it felt kind of eerie because of, like I mentioned, those really, really dark inks casting this weird light on what should be like a normal looking thing, you know, just this woman standing in a room with some babies in a crib, and I'm like, cool, this looks like a normal thing, but it's just like creepy now. And then when you see the next page in panel where the, you know, guy's crashed his car, wrapped it around a pole, and all of a sudden this little baby pops out and starts, you know, killing the guy, eating his throat. I'm like, oh, okay, this is what I'm getting into. And it took me by surprise, and I really enjoyed it because it was a little bit jarring, just enough to be like, oh, okay, cool, let's go. And now I'm like, okay, I got to get the next one and get the next one, and let's see them. But I did what I asked, so because it's black and white, I think anyone will see and draw the connection to The Walking Dead. What is it with this series that you guys are going to try and do to differentiate it, make it different, make it stand out, to be fun for readers and pull them in?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Well, I think I have very little connection with The Walking Dead, just to be honest. I don't watch the show. I have read the comic, and I think Robert Kirkman is a fantastic writer. And I fully admit, although I'm a horror fan, and maybe I'll go back to Walking Dead one day, it was so heavy. I just couldn't take it. Like it's so well done, and the characters are so well done. But I just had a feeling reading maybe, you know, a dozen or 15 issues years ago. I was like, I don't think this is getting better for anybody. Like I don't think we're getting out of this. And so, Damn Cursed Children is a black and white horror tale for sure, but I think it has a little bit more fun and action, and although not like a full-blown catchphrases the way Ash in Army of Darkness has or anything like that, you know, it has these big epic movie moments in it, and a little bit more camp to it for sure. With our monsters sometimes have a bit more of a Gremlins feel to them. So yeah, it's definitely like I said, like I couldn't name Walking Dead characters. I'm in the great minority of horror fans, I think. But and I think if a Walking Dead fan is coming over to us, we'll take them. Welcome. But I think a few pages into the first issue, they'll see that it's a very different beast, I think.
Yeah. I'm with Josh. That sounds going to sound bad, but I haven't read the comic books nor watched the show. I know of it because I have a lot of friends, like most people who are big fans of it, who try to get me to watch it. I haven't watched it or read the comic books. I have met Robert a long time ago at a convention. Very nice, sweet guy. You never imagine he would write something so horrific. We were talking about kids when I met him, so that was really interesting. But for ours, from what I know of The Walking Dead, because I'm not obviously like Josh, I don't know the names nor the real, overall story of it. They dealt with zombies and the survival of it. We're dealing with the initial shock of it happening at the get-go. So it's like imagine yourself being dropped, a bomb of, okay, the world has now changed right now. Everything has gone to hell at this moment. What do you do? So we're looking at, in the first 5 issues, you're looking at what normal people would do and how they would react. And no one acts rationally at the beginning of something that goes beyond what you would call normal. So people are acting irrationally, which is what people would do. And, what's one of the things that I made sure that we did with our characters is the flinching response to things. And what that means is like when in an action movie, when someone throws a punch, someone will block it and counterpunch because they're prepared, they're ready for it. That's how it is. But if you ask me to do that, I'll probably and get hit in the face or duck and run, or if I can, or whatever. or throw something and then run. You wouldn't think of I'm going to block this, and then I'm going to counter with an elbow and then follow up with no. It's more like you squeal and then you put your hands up. So that's the flinching response, and that's what I wanted all the characters to have. It's like this initial response to having this happen around them. So the first 5 issues is like basically the beginning of all that, and how the characters evolve in that moment. So it wasn't like this doesn't happen like over a couple of weeks in the first 5 issues. It's actually the first couple hours. So
right on.
So it's, people are going to act really differently, as according to their situation and their background as well. And we made sure we didn't go through the tropes of having an engineer or a scientist or a medical person and so forth. Basically this perfect crew of people who are strangers who come together and become this perfect team to survive this stuff. No, like one of our characters is a daycare worker. That's not going to really help too much in the scheme of things. So that's the whole point, though. You get people who are normal people together and see what happens, and that's what made me enjoy writing this. It wasn't like the horror stuff, the gore stuff, and finding how they use the children and stuff like that was great. But finding the right tone for the characters' voices and their reactions and the emotions that they have was really what drove me to enjoy this, because it's sort of like you don't see this much in horror, especially now, because now everybody's going the quick shock scare because they need to sell this movie or this Netflix series. We got to have these kind of scenes in it. We got to have this kind of over the top horrific, whatever you call it, blockbuster scene in our movie, whatever. So we ignored all of that and focused on the characters' responses to things. So if you actually go through even the first issue, if you guys pick up the first issue and then imagine switching all the characters out for what you would normally see in a horror movie like this, a survivor movie, it'll become a different story completely. That's one of the things that we did that was different, hopefully, from The Walking Dead. As I said, I haven't read The Walking Dead, so I don't know. As for going back to the inking and stuff, I remember when we talked to Robin, I said to make it like film noir, make it really dark and stuff like that. Don't just. And it sounds bad when I say that, because I'm not an artist, but as a writer, you have to know these different levels of techniques and artistic styles and stuff. It's not to trace your lines, because that's not inking. Inking is, rendering the scene and stuff like that. So I sent him a lot of examples just in case of, really great film noir books. And he followed up on it with, his style and made it darker, I guess, in that way. Because I remember him asking if we were going... I remember him asking now. He asked if we were going to color this. And if we were going to color this for sure, he would leave the rendering all the color, because he was planning to color it. But when we said maybe not, he started inking darker. I think that's what happened. This is like years ago, so I'm trying to remember all these things now. But that's what happened with that. Yeah, that's what happened with Robin and that. Another thing about differentiating from zombie books is that these kids are not the living dead. So they're not zombies.
Oh, okay. So they're not like hard, like fictional zombies.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely like horror snob it up and say that kind of like, Frankenstein's monster is not Frankenstein. But yeah, these kids aren't zombies. They're monsters, because there's not that kind of semi-immortal nature to them. They're not crawling out of graves. It's just there's a snap of the fingers, and all of a sudden they're all feral. But yeah, so and there's not that like you have to shoot them in the head, anything like that. So they're not zombies. They're I don't know if it's a classification, but they're more of like some kind of plague monster or something. But also what I really love is my big influence is George Romero, and I love how in Night of the Living Dead it's never explained. Like in what became like that original trilogy and his stuff that came afterwards, never ever explained of it's a science-based thing or a magic-based thing. It's just happened. And I love stories like that kind of don't iron out the secret origin perfectly. So for our book, it happens, but we don't know why. It's a mystery. And so that's a definite influence on the George Romero side of things. But yeah, I always kind of joking, because I don't think I'm a nerd snob, but I joke that I'm like, these aren't zombies. I imagine being on a panel someday and like yelling at some fan in the crowd, they're not zombies, you're wrong.
And John's just gonna flip the table and then storm out.
Yeah.
Leaving me there like, And that's our panel. Thank you.
Yeah.